I'm talking to a room of economists. I don't need to really convince you guys that we care about human capital, but one thing I do want to emphasize, though, is, there's two ways of measuring, quantity of human capital. There's two ways of measuring human capital. There's quantity, number of years studied, and then there's quality of education inputs or outcomes. And that's kind of what I'm going to be emphasizing during this talk, is the quality dimension. So it's a conference on inequality, which means I should show you some graphs demonstrating just obscene heterogeneity. And so this is it. So here are some kind of pictures of what the US college market looked like 20 years ago. So this is roughly the cohort of college students who are the parents of today's middle schoolers and high schoolers, okay? Now, all of the pictures I'm going to show you use a sample of four-year degree granting institutions and only ones that showed up in US News and World Report's best colleges. So, you'll be surprised at how bad some of these numbers get, given that, but there's no two-year colleges, there's no community colleges, there's no for-profit colleges, right? This is only the non-for-profit market, public and private. Okay, so first of all, per student spending, and so what I'm going to show you is empirical CDFs, and I'm going to plot them at the 5 to 95 interval, because the upper tails get really big and it's hard to make out the graph. So per student spending between the bottom of the market and the top of the market differs by more than an order of magnitude. Mean faculty compensations, so we had some discussion yesterday about, teacher quality. Between the bottom and the top, we have more than a doubling of market prices for mean faculty compensation. Students per faculty, at the bottom, at the top quality of the market, we're ranging around 9, and at the top, we're getting quite large. And then, these various sort of input factors contribute to this sort of really stark and surprising output factor. So what we're looking at here is empirical CDF of campus-wide 6-year graduation rates for bachelor's degree granting institutions, okay? And this is really what most of people in our social network sort of find surprising. We're used to thinking about, graduation rates upwards of, 75% or better. There's a large fraction of the college market where 6-year graduation rates are below 50%, and some of them even quite bad. So the amount of heterogeneity in this market is really quite startling, and it's not just back 20 years ago. The market today, if you look at some numbers, which you can download from iPads, are very, very similar. Okay, per student spending today averages at about $18,000. On a campus level, but with a standard deviation of $24,000, okay?
Can you give us some idea of what these colleges are at the bottom half? Because as you said, it's probably not my social circle of people who are going to them.
Yeah, so the top third is gonna be, like the flagship state schools and the top privates. You're gonna find private schools actually along this entire quality spectrum. So you think, maybe all this stuff down here is state schools. There's plenty of private schools that populate, the lower end too. In the middle, you're gonna find, like the better state schools and liberal arts colleges, and then, down here you're gonna find sort of middle Mississippi Tech and stuff like that. But yeah, if I were to rattle off, names of schools down here, you probably wouldn't recognize all of them, but you probably would recognize some of them. Okay, so these are not, and once again, these are only in these graphs. These are only schools that appear in U.S. News and World Report's America's Best Colleges publication. Okay. And we're talking about 1,300 of the top 4-year degree granting institutions in the country. So vast heterogeneity, which is going to, naturally lead to quite a bit of inequality in education and post-secondary educational inputs, but the inequality is particularly stark as delineated by race. So what do I mean by that? So once again, in that same year, 1996, almost 18% of new university freshmen were either black or Hispanic. If we take the top quintile of college quality, they were less than 12% of enrollment. The bottom quintile, they were almost 30% of enrollment. Okay. So this is what I'm going to call the enrollment gap. Now, related to this is another well-known race gap called the achievement gap. Okay. So that same year, median minority SAT. So for those of you non-Americans, the SAT is a standardized college entrance exam that we use in this side of the pond. And so median minority SAT scores were below the lower quartile for non-minorities, whites and Asians. Okay. Now, by the way, Asians are not underrepresented minorities. Asians tend to have the best test scores and go to the best schools among all demographic groups. So they're not one of the targets of policies like affirmative action. Okay, so then affirmative action comes in, and basically what it means is, we're going to, allocations of college seats along this quality spectrum are going to be in some sense in rank order fashion. If you get better grades in high school, you go to a better college. But where affirmative action comes in, it breaks somewhat with assortativity and gives preferential treatment to race, okay, when making these allocations. Used all over the world in many different circumstances, quite controversial, and has attracted a lot of attention from empirical researchers over the past several decades. Okay, so what I'm going to concentrate on is one issue with past literature on affirmative action is that it has treated human capital investment, or SAT scores, as fixed and reflective of only student abilities and something exogenous. Okay. Well, the problem is that when affirmative action is giving a preference for race in making college admissions, then affirmative action is also going to mold the mapping between my achievement during high school and the college that I'll get placed at. And therefore, it's gonna shape the mapping between my human capital investment and my market outcome. And so if that's the case, then it might also alter my labor-leisure trade-off during high school, okay? So really quick example, just kind of to fix ideas. Let's suppose that all students have 24 hours in the day. They would like to consume as many of those hours in Xbox time as possible, but they recognize that if they invest some of their leisure time into study, they can get better grades and go to a better college, okay? So Tommy is thinking here, on the one hand, if I study more, if I give up more of my Xbox time, I can go to Harvard. But on the other hand, if I want to go to Harvard, I have to give up enough of my Xbox time to compete with the kids that are going to go there. And if my ability and resources are low, maybe I'm better off opting for University of Northern Illinois instead and consuming more Xbox time now. Okay? And so if mental calculations like this really matter for young people, then affirmative action might be used to narrow human capital achievement gaps between blacks and whites. So I think the resources idea here is quite salient. If I'm a black or Hispanic kid in the United States, typically I'm attending a much lower quality K-12 school district. My parents are less educated. I have less access to health care, to tutoring resources, and it's going to be much more costly for me to produce a given level of human capital than it would be for my white and Asian counterparts in the suburbs. Okay. So there's a new smallish literature on this. What I'm going to do is I'm going to concentrate on a field experiment that I worked on with these co-authors, sort of testing whether these kind of calculations that I'm hinting at here are going to be salient for kids in determining their own leisure study trade-off in this sort of middle childhood phase where they're investing in the human capital that they'll bring with them to college. Okay. So basically, what we're trying to figure out is, could these sort of incentives really be thought of as a potential market design tool? Yeah, so how does affirmative action shape labor-leisure trade-offs and academic outcomes? Does the human capital investment increase for one group, say, come at the cost of lower investment elsewhere? And how does affirmative action affect the human capital production gap between the races, right? So once again, this previous literature kind of has taken the view that the college enrollment gap is just mechanically being operated on by affirmative action, and human capital stock is just fixed and exogenous, right? But if these incentive effects are really being shaped by college admissions rules, then affirmative action is going to alter the stock of human capital endogenously, and that's also going to have a multiplicative effect on how it'll shape college admissions outcomes later on as well. Okay, so I'm just going to show you 2 slides with math, and that's it, and then I'll get to our field experiment. But the model in a nutshell. So we're actually going to think about the college market as a multi-unit all-pay auction, right? So there's a bunch of prizes out there that we're bidding for, right? One of them is called Harvard, one is Michigan State, and one is Middle Mississippi Tech. And the currency in the market is SAT scores, right? So the bidders are students, and each one has an idiosyncratic marginal cost of human capital production, theta. There's an observable demographic distinction between different students. Some students belong to a disadvantaged group, and some belong to an advantaged group. What do I mean by that? I mean that the distribution of costs within group D stochastically dominate costs within group A, okay? So there are very talented and very struggling students in both groups, but the relative masses of human capital production costs differ across groups, okay? So bids are going to be human capital levels that students choose to produce. And the prizes that they're vying for are seats. And we're going to assume that seats follow this quality distribution FS. Okay, I don't think that's ever even going to come up anymore. But so basically my payoff is, if I have type theta and I want to produce H units of human capital, I have to incur this cost here before going on to the college market. Therefore, it's an all-pay auction, right? If I have H units of human capital and I get matched with a school S, then I realize this match utility U of H and S. Now, there's this function here, Sj of H. That's going to be the market design tool. Okay, so this is going to be a race-specific mapping between human capital output in high school and your college placement outcome. Okay. So for example, in a colorblind system, it wouldn't matter which demographic group you come from. If you produce H units of human capital, you're going to be sent to the same school, okay? But in an affirmative action scheme, what's going to happen is, if you're from the disadvantaged group, for a given test score H, we're going to send you to a slightly higher quality school than we would if you belong to group A, okay? Okay, so I'm going to show you a first order condition, which might mean that I win the math competition for this conference, which I'm really excited about. But basically, there's 2 benefits of having an additional unit of human capital. It's a productive asset, right? And this is kind of where the Becker type incentives live. But then also, if I have more human capital, that also helps me in the competition among my peers, and I can get placed better, right? So this is where the sort of Spence type incentives live, okay? And so to get some intuition for how things are going to work in this model, so basically one of the key model predictions are how discouragement effects happen, okay? So I want you to consider a very simple comparative static. Let's take my cost type theta, my ability is theta, and let's just hold that fixed. And now let's consider a situation where the distribution of my competitors shifts so that their costs become lower on average, and I'm now further behind the curve, okay? So if I have a very low cost type, which means I'm a very high ability student, I'll actually increase my investment activities in response to the heavier competition. But if I'm a medium or a low ability student, I'm going to decrease my investment, okay? And so the way affirmative action works to alter investment incentives, it basically either partially or fully shields minority students from competition with the other better resourced group, okay? So, for example, in a representative quota system where you have this complete separation of the game and minorities only compete with other minorities, you're going to have the best and brightest minority students are going to decrease achievement, but then most minority students are actually going to increase achievement because the policy is mitigating these discouragement effects, okay? For the other group, the type-specific predictions are about the same, are the opposite for the same intuition. However, the relative magnitudes are going to be different. So it's roughly true that the mean effect for group D will be positive, and the mean effect for group A will be ambiguous, okay? Okay, so I've got 5 minutes to show you my field experiments. Here's what we did. So basically, in a nutshell, we went to some public schools in Utah. So we're testing affirmative action using a sample of white Republican Mormon kids in Utah. So what we did was we used our 7th graders as a stand-in for the disadvantaged group and 8th graders as a stand-in for the advantaged group, okay? We gave them a pre-test score, and then we randomized at the individual level into 2 separate competitions, okay? Within each competition, we put the same distribution of cash prizes on the table, and we told the kids that these are going to be allocated in rank order fashion, okay? For the colorblind group, we don't care whether you're 7th grade or 8th grade. It's just going to be rank order allocations. For the affirmative action treatment, however, we first take a representative subset of these prices, earmark them for allocation only to 7th graders. But at the end of the day, the per capita money on the table is the same across groups. It's only your relative competition that differs across the 2 treatments. And then what we said is we gave them 10 days to practice math on a website that we set up so that we could monitor their labor-leisure trade-off during that time, okay? And then at the end of the period, we gave the post-tests and we allocated prizes. So let me just cut to the chase. Okay. So I hope you're absorbing all this while I go by. Okay. So here's the main table of results here. So what we have are several outcomes that we measured. We measured the fraction of people that used our website. We measured the number of different math subjects that they attempted while on our website, the total time inputs that they gave us, the total number of questions attempted, and then their final exam score to see if that changed, okay? And then these regressions control for whether you're in the quota treatment, whether you're in the advantaged or the disadvantaged group, and then your pre-existing ability when the experiment began. So this coefficient here tells us the treatment effect for 7th graders for the disadvantaged students in the affirmative action group, okay? And what we see here are that those 7th graders, so the affirmative action tended to more than double the fraction of 7th graders that did at least some work on our website. It more than doubled the number of subjects they attempted, the amount of time they spent on our website. We have marginal evidence that it increased the number of questions they tried. And here's another interesting thing. 7th graders in the affirmative action treatment increased their test scores by 1/5 of a standard deviation over a 2-week period in response to these incentives. There's a whole bunch of other things. So these CDFs line up exactly how the theory predicts they do, which is kind of cool. And so anyway, okay, so those are the basic results. So we see these big positive incentive effects for the minority group. Now, for the non-minority group, we don't see any statistical evidence that they decreased investment either or outcomes. Now, question is, how does this competition with 7th and 8th graders in Utah compare to the competition for actual college seats among minorities and non-minorities. Okay. So basically what this graph kind of gives us a comparison of is, so the blue line tells us that our 7th graders were roughly half of a standard deviation behind their 8th grade counterparts in our competition. What the red line tells us is that in a nationally representative standardized test, the NAEP, black 8th graders were were 90% of a standard deviation behind their white counterparts. So by that metric, at 8th grade, black students are more than 1 grade level behind their white and Asian counterparts at the beginning of this competition where everybody's going to start investing in their human capital so they can go to college. Okay, question number 2, what about the mapping between long-run incentives and labor-leisure trade-offs in high school? I'll just show you this one and then I'll end. And there's some other stuff in the chapter. So in our study, we found that people who gave us positive amounts of time worked on our website roughly could expect an effective hourly wage of $10.73 per hour. Okay, so what about the actual college market? So we did some very back of the envelope calculations to try and figure out roughly what the magnitudes of money on the table might be. So we used a bunch of data from the CPS tables to try and calibrate rough, net present value of a college education from the perspective of a 19-year-old, and then divide that by total number of hours worked over 4 years of high school. Okay. And what we get, depending on whether you're assuming the kid's going to go to a public or a private university where costs and graduation rates are different, and depending on what you want to assume about how patient the kid is, we get roughly per hour compensation rates of between $12 and $50 an hour. Okay, and so if we want to think about using this as market design tools in the real world for actually affecting real race gaps, we want to think more about how do affirmative action induced improvements in college placement map into effectively hourly compensation for minority students, and then how do these improvements compare to the inherent disadvantage in human capital investment costs from fewer childhood education inputs. Okay, and with that, I'll thank you very much for your time.